In this video, I'm pitting the Makita track saw against my Dewalt circular saw. What were you expecting? Festool? In case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly swimming in sponsors. Today's video is sponsored by me. Just me. So I know what you're thinking. It's not exactly a fair comparison between these two saws. The question here is though, could you get by with a circular saw and not have to spend the money on a specialized track saw? So when you really get down to basics, a track saw is just a way of cutting a straight line, similar to a table saw. However, with a table saw, you're bringing the wood to the saw, but with a track saw, you're taking the saw to the wood. Now this is especially useful if you're working with large materials such as sheet goods or large tabletop. With the track saw, you simply lay the track on the piece of wood and set the saw on the track. It's going to follow that track and cut a perfectly straight line. You can do the same thing with a circular saw. Though with a circular saw, it can be difficult to keep a perfectly straight line. That's where the track comes in. This is an example of a homemade track that I made for my Dewalt circular saw. This is just a piece of 1/2" MDF, and I glued a small strip of MDF to the top of it. Once those are glued together, you just set your saw on the top and cut off the edge. That gives you a perfectly straight line that you can use. It works just like a track on a track saw. You can even make these in a variety of sizes so that you don't have to lug around one that's too large for the piece that you're cutting. I've made 3 different sizes, one that'll fit crosswise across a full sheet of plywood. Made one a little bit smaller for cutting smaller pieces. And I've got one that's just over 8 feet long, so I can cut the entire length of a sheet of plywood. To get a similar track for a track saw, you're either going to have to piece together multiple sections of track or buy one long section that's going to cost you several $100s. For that price, I can buy an entire sheet of MDF and make multiple tracks out of it. Now, when you're using a circular saw with a homemade track, the base of the saw is going to ride on the track, and this auxiliary piece is what the saw sets against to provide you a straight and true cut. Now you have to ensure that when you're using it, you're pushing forward and into the fence. If you're not constantly pushing somewhat into the fence, your saw can start to drift away, and that's going to give you inaccurate results. You also need to make sure that when you finish the cut, you allow the saw to come to a complete stop before you try to move it. Otherwise, you can get what I have here, which is a gouge in my track. This comes from getting to the end of the cut and then trying to lift the saw while it was still spinning. Now when we look at the track saw, we can see that it rides on this rail on the track, and that prevents it from going to the left or to the right. So we're not nearly as concerned about drifting as we were with the circular saw and the homemade track. This is going to run straight and true every time. Since the blade plunges up and down, we don't have to be concerned about gouging into the track when we get to the end of the cut. We can simply allow the saw to come back up into the protective cover, and the blade is out of the way. It's not going to gouge into the workpiece or into our track. The track saw also has a dust port, so you can connect your dust collector or shop vac. This significantly cuts down on the amount of dust that you have when you make a cut. Now, since I don't have one of those fancy flip-top tables for cutting large sheet goods, this is where I do it. And yes, it's every bit as comfortable as it looks. Although it's not the ideal working height, the floor actually gives me plenty of room for working full sheets of plywood. A few scrap pieces of styrofoam protect my floor mats and also provides good support while making my cuts. Now let's take a sample cut using the circular saw and one using the track saw and see how they compare. I set my homemade track on the line, and because it moves around a little bit, I use a couple of C-clamps to keep it in position. I have to lift the guard out of the way to set the saw on the track. Then, while keeping pressure into the fence, I push forward to complete the cut. As you can see, without dust collection, this produces a lot of dust. But the cut is perfectly straight and just a little bit of tear out on the offcut. Next, we'll make the same cut using the Makita track saw. As before, I set the track on the line. However, this time, since the track has the sticky rubber on the bottom of it, I don't feel the need to clamp it in place. I just set the saw on the track, plunge the saw down into the wood, and push forward along the guide rail. Since this is the first time using the saw and track, it removed a small strip of rubber from the track. From here on, the blade will cut perfectly flush to the track. The cut is perfectly straight, and there's a lot less tear out, but I believe this is due to the new blade. With the shop vac connected, you can see there's very little dust. Okay, now we've seen both of these saws in action. The decision on which one to purchase really comes down to 4 key factors: cost, dust collection, ease of use, and accuracy. Now, as far as cost, the Dewalt or any other standard circular saw is going to win easily over a track saw. You can get a decent circular saw for around $100. I wouldn't go any cheaper than that, because then you're really going to get into you get what you pay for. Now, for a track saw, you're looking at around $500 for something like the Makita or the Dewalt track saw. If you're going up to Festool, you're looking at a couple $100 more. For dust collection, there's really no contest here. The track saw is going to win hands down. The circular saws typically don't have any dust collection at all, so they're going to make a lot of dust, make a huge mess whenever you use them. However, with the track saw, with the dust port, you can collect them to your dust collector or to a shop vac, and it's really going to cut down on the dust that's created. For ease of use, it's almost a toss-up, but I'm going to give this over to the track saw as well. For the homemade tracks, they slide around a little too much, and you're going to have to use clamps every time to make sure that it doesn't move on you while you're trying to cut. The tracks for the track saw have this sticky rubber on the bottom of the track that prevents them from sliding around as much. So that's really going to help to move the track quickly from one cut to the next without having to mess around with the clamps. Now, when it comes to accuracy, you can get really good results from either one of these tools. The track saw is going to provide accurate results every single time. You can get great results from a circular saw as well, as long as you're careful not to allow the saw to drift away from the track. For me, I've used a circular saw with homemade tracks for many years. In fact, this outfeed table I built a few months ago with this Dewalt circular saw and my homemade tracks. I didn't have any issues with accuracy. I just had to deal more with the setup of the track and moving the clamps, and a lot of dust that was created. That's kind of what pushed me towards purchasing a track saw. I'm really looking to reduce the amount of dust that's created in my shop, and this is going to save me some time on some future projects. So I hope this video helps you with the decision on whether you want to purchase a track saw. Please make sure you subscribe so you know when I release a new video. Until then, please go check out one of my other videos. Thanks for watching. That's not what I want to say.